There are countries shaped by geography, and then there are countries entirely dependent on it. Egypt belongs to the second category, because without the Nile River, Egypt as we know it would simply not exist. Not metaphorically, not economically, not politically, physically. Almost every major city in Egypt sits along the Nile. Nearly all of the country's agriculture depends on its waters. Most of its population lives within a narrow strip surrounding the riverbanks and delta. Beyond that, desert, endless desert. From space, Egypt looks almost unnatural. A thin green ribbon cuts through one of the driest regions on Earth, surrounded by vast expanses of barren land. It resembles a civilization suspended inside a desert rather than built beside one. And in many ways, that is exactly what it is. For thousands of years, the Nile has functioned as Egypt's lifeline. It provided water, food, transportation, trade, communication, fertile soil. Long before modern infrastructure existed, the river unified Upper and Lower Egypt into one coherent civilization. It allowed crops to grow where almost nothing else could survive and connected settlements across enormous distances. Without the Nile, there would have been no pyramids, no pharaohs, no Alexandria, no Cairo, no ancient Egyptian civilization. The river created Egypt, and even today it continues to sustain it. Modern Egypt has a population of more than 100 million people, yet over 95% of them live within close proximity to the Nile and its delta. The statistic alone reveals something extraordinary. This is not a country distributed across its territory. It is a civilization compressed around a single water source. And this concentration creates enormous vulnerability, because when a nation depends so heavily on one river, control over water becomes a matter of national survival. To understand why this matters so much, we need to look south. The Nile is not a single river born in Egypt. It is an international river system stretching across multiple countries and thousands of kilometers. The two main branches of the Nile, the White Nile and the Blue Nile, originate far beyond Egyptian territory. The White Nile begins deep in East Africa near Lake Victoria. The Blue Nile begins in the Ethiopian highlands. And despite receiving less attention historically, the Blue Nile is especially important because it supplies the majority of the water that eventually reaches Egypt during the flood season. This means something critically important. Egypt depends on water sources it does not control. And for most of modern history, geography worked in Egypt's favor. Upstream countries lacked the infrastructure, political stability, or industrial capacity to significantly alter the river's flow. Egypt therefore operated under an assumption that the Nile would continue to function much as it always had. But that assumption is now being challenged. Over the past decade, Ethiopia has emerged as one of Africa's fastest growing and most ambitious states. At the center of this transformation lies a massive infrastructure project known as the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Built along the Blue Nile, the dam represents one of the largest hydroelectric projects in Africa. For Ethiopia, the logic behind it is straightforward. The country needs electricity, industrialization, economic growth, energy independence. And with a population exceeding 100 million people, Ethiopian leaders view the Nile not as Egypt's lifeline, but as a regional resource that upstream nations can have the right to utilize. From Ethiopia's perspective, development is impossible without energy. But from Egypt's perspective, reduced water flow represents an existential threat. And this is where geography collides with politics, because rivers do not respect national borders. What happens upstream inevitably affects everyone downstream. For Egypt, even relatively small disruptions in water availability can have enormous consequences. Agriculture depends heavily on irrigation. Urban populations continue growing rapidly. Food imports already strain national finances. Water scarcity is increasing. Climate pressure are intensifying. And unlike countries with abundant rainfall or alternative freshwater sources, Egypt has very little strategic flexibility. There are few substitutes for the Nile. This helps explain why Egyptian leaders speak about the river with such intensity. For many countries, water policy is an economic issue. For Egypt, it is a civilizational issue. Historically, access to the Nile determined whether Egypt prospered or collapsed. Droughts and weak flooding cycles contributed to instability even during the ancient world. And while modern engineering has reduced some of these risks, it has also created new dependencies. The construction of the Aswan High Dam during the 20th century allowed Egypt to regulate flooding, expand agriculture, and generate electricity. But it also tied the country even more tightly to controlled water management systems. Today, the Nile supports not only farms, but massive urban populations, industrial zones, transportation networks, and electrical infrastructure. Modern Egypt is therefore more dependent on the river than ever before. At the same time, the broader region surrounding the Nile Basin is becoming increasingly unstable. Population growth across East Africa is accelerating competition over resources. Climate change threatens rainfall patterns. Political tensions continue rising between upstream and downstream states. And all of this unfolds around one of the world's most important rivers. This is why the dispute surrounding the Ethiopian dam matters far beyond Africa. It is not merely a disagreement about infrastructure. It is a geopolitical struggle over one of civilization's oldest realities. Who controls water controls survival. But there is another layer to this story that often goes unnoticed. The Nile does not only sustain Egypt internally, it also supports Egypt's geopolitical position externally. Because the concentration of population and economic activity around the Nile helped create Cairo, one of the largest cities in the Middle East and Africa. It enabled the formation of centralized political power, large armies, regional influence, trade networks. The river transformed Egypt into a strategic bridge connecting Africa, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East. And that strategic importance later expanded with the construction of the Suez Canal, which turned Egypt into one of the world's most important maritime transit states. But even the Suez Canal ultimately depends on the existence of a stable Egyptian state. And that state depends on the Nile. This is why Egyptian governments consistently treat water security as a national security issue. Not because they are exaggerating, but because geography leaves them little choice. When people look at maps, they often focus on borders. But borders alone rarely explain how countries function. The deeper reality lies beneath them: water systems, trade routes, terrain resources, climate. And few places demonstrate this more clearly than Egypt, because Egypt is not merely a country that happens to contain a river. It is a river civilization that happens to contain a country. The Nile shaped Egypt thousands of years ago. It continues to shape it today. And in many ways, Egypt's future may depend on whether that ancient relationship between civilization and water can survive the pressures of the modern world.